Is that what? I was getting thumbs. I had no idea what that meant. We are being live streamed, and so we're going to ask that myself and other members of the committee, should they speak, and when you speak, that we do so at live microphones so it can be picked up over the live stream that is going on right now. We are here on House official business. This is a duty of the House, and before we begin the input on the maps here, I'm going to ask that you rise and join me in a Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, everyone. That is how the House begins its work every day when we meet here in session. As I said, we are here being live streamed to receive comments on the maps that have been posted online. There are 2 maps for every district that have been proposed by committee members, and we're here tonight to take input on that mapping. If I didn't say so, there is mask seating to my left. Those would be in what we refer to as sections 4 and 5 of the hall. If you didn't know, if you look down at the little metal plate by your seat and figure that you are in section 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5, that is the code to that strange license plate you see around the state that says state legislature with a number, 1, 2, 3, or 5, dash, and that dash leads to the seat number, and that metal plate tells you what seat you're in, so there you go. That's the code that you see driving around the highway, and frankly, I think it's there because none of us could remember our seat from one session to the other anyways. So that's how you find your seat, and you find each other. Tonight, so we know who would like to speak in regards to the bills, there is a blue sheet outside for sign up. I'm going to ask that people come to a microphone after I call them to speak. We have a number of people signed up. I expect to have more people signed up after we go through these. It is my intent to end this by 8 o'clock. So there isn't going to be a time limit per se on speaking, but if it gets to the point in the evening where I'm worried that not everybody is going to be able to speak who wants to speak, we might start doing a time limit, and generally that's 3 minutes. 3 minutes is actually what they tell us as representatives is the limit for time that you should be speaking in order to get your point across, but of course it's a lot different when you're talking out to 400 people sitting here in the hall. So with that, I'd like to get started. We did have a session yesterday, and this is our second session. This session yesterday was during the day, commencing at 10 o'clock, and we are here on Wednesday, November 10th, commencing at 5, and I started a little late, and my apologies for that. The first person signed up is William Farnham from Tamworth. And that name sounds very familiar to me. Might have been we heard from somebody yesterday. Your wife.
Is the mic on? Yes.
Yes,
Good.
it is.
Thank
Welcome.
You. Thank you, Madam Chairman, members of the committee. I'm pleased to be here to give my testimony about the maps. The subject that I have is the congressional district maps. Competitive in elections. What does it produce? Competition promotes more choice for the voters. Competition promotes more dialogue between people with different points of view. Competition promotes better understanding of the issues. Competition promotes dialogue about desired outcomes. When elections are competitive, the candidates must articulate how they will represent all of their constituents. And I would like to add here that an elected official, once elected, all of the people of that district are their constituents, not just the ones that solely voted for them. Competition ensures the best candidate will be elected, regardless of party. Competition generates more voter turnout, thus better representation of all the voters. What does non-competitiveness in elections, what does it produce? Less choice, a more shallow understanding of complex issues. The candidates have no reason to explain what they can do for all of the constituents they will represent. They only need to appeal to one group. More extreme partisan candidates. No competition between different points of view and no discussion of different goals. Less voter turnout, thus less representation and less engagement with democracy. Lower voter turnout can have consequences on down-ballot seats. No cooperation between the parties, no discussion of the goals and needs of the constituents. Moving 75 towns out of one congressional district and placing them in another is a major change. The proposed Republican map would move 365,703 people to a new district. The purpose of this change was stated by Republican Party Chair Steve Stepanek, who argued the party's newly won majorities in the State House and Senate would give them the opportunity to change the congressional maps in their favor. Stepanek said, quote, "Because of this, we control redistricting. I can stand here today and guarantee you that we will send a conservative Republican to Washington, D.C. as a congressperson in 2022. To which I would say that fits the definition of gerrymandering. In an interview with MUR in July, Sununu said he would veto a redistricting proposal, and I quote, if it doesn't pass the smell test and looks like gerrymandering districts. If the Republican proposed congressional district map is put forward, the governor will have to hose his nose or veto it. Thank you for your time and your work on this very hard issue, and may democracy go forward."
Madam Chair Griffin and other committee members, my name is Phil Hatcher. I've been a resident of Dover for the past 35 years. Thank you for this opportunity to provide input on your redistricting work, and thank you for providing a public hearing in the evening, which will allow more people to communicate directly with you on this important topic. Shifting to my testimony now, what is the point of having a constitution if you do not read it? At your November 3rd work session, Representative Turcott, in presenting the majority's proposed New Hampshire House map for Coos County, stated that the map had no floterials, and he saw no reason to add floterials. I will give you a reason, because the Constitution says that Berlin, with a population of 9,425, should have its own district. Actually, it does not say should. It says shall have its own district. So my question is, what is your reason for ignoring the New Hampshire Constitution? Or perhaps the problem is not a failure to read the Constitution. Perhaps the problem is misreading the Constitution. Representative Stephen Smith, when questioned during the November 4th work session about the majority's New Hampshire House map for Cheshire County, offered a novel interpretation of the New Hampshire Constitution's requirements for redistricting the New Hampshire House. He said that Walpole, with a population of 3,633, was a little too large to warrant its own district. I think you could hear the crowd that day collectively murmur, "Say what?" I believe the party of the majority is the one that generally claims to hew to the legal theory of original intent when trying to interpret words and phrases in statutes or constitutions. So let's check the legislative record for CACR 41, which, when passed in 2006, updated the New Hampshire Constitution to include the text requiring eligible towns to receive their own districts. CACR 41 was sponsored by 3 Republicans, Representative Neil Kirk, Representative Richard Kennedy, and Senator Robert Flanders. When Senator Flanders introduced it in the Senate, he said, quote, this CACR provides that when a town or ward has enough inhabitants to equal or exceed the number required for 1 representative seat, it shall have its own district. It's crystal clear. And the majority did not only ignore the Constitution in Coos and Cheshire, it did this throughout the counties. In my county, Stratford, they chose to place Dover Ward 4 in a district with Madbury and Lee. This district and a district for Durham were then combined to form a flotilla with a single representative who will represent over 37,000 residents. This is crazy for several reasons. A large flotilla, first of all. Then, both Dover Ward 4 and Lee have sufficient population to require they be given their own district. Stratford County residents also, at the county hearing, the county listening sessions, stated a clear preference for the wards of Rochester, Dover, and Somersworth to be kept together and not placed in districts with neighboring towns. And this is totally unnecessary. With the minority map, as well as the Mapathon map, keeping the Dover and Rochester wards together while providing more eligible towns with their own districts than does the majority map, while keeping the population deviation below the 10% threshold. There's no reason for what the majority is proposing for Stratford County. But ignoring, in 2011 perhaps, you could get away with claiming that your proposed map was the best that could be done. But the public has gotten savvier, and the computational tools have gotten better and more widely available. Making that claim now for these bogus maps is simply not going to fly, either politically or legally. But ignoring the Constitution is not just ignoring some words on the page. It is ignoring the people who voted overwhelmingly during the November 2006 election to approve CACR 41. In fact, 71% voted for CACR 41. When you ignore the text inserted by CACR 41, you are ignoring those 71%. But when I stopped to think about it, I realized that is really what this is all about. It's about rigging a system so that a large majority of the voters can be ignored. And the majority's proposal for the congressional districts is more of the same. They packing Democratic-leaning voters in one district and packing the Republican-leaning voters in the other district. It has the striking result of ignoring voters of both parties. Republicans voting in the blue district have no voice in the choice of their U.S. representative. Democrats voting in the red district also have no voice. All decisions are made in the primary. And the November election is meaningless. Sound great? Only if you are a leader in a party that knows it cannot compete on a level playing field. And why was the state GOP's chair so excited at the prospect of sending one more conservative to Congress? Remember, he made that statement in January 2021. Only a few weeks after many Republicans in Congress voted to not accept electoral votes cast for President Biden. Could it be that the New Hampshire GOP is maneuvering to get one more GOP vote in Congress to reject electoral votes awarded by the popular vote? Rigging the system one more time, ignoring the Constitution one more time, to finally get to that holy grail of removing the votes for president by ordinary people and replacing them with the votes of Republicans in a heavily gerrymandered U.S. Congress. That would finish squaring the circle, wouldn't it? Please reject the majority's unconstitutional New Hampshire House maps, as well as their heavily gerrymandered congressional map. Let's not weaken any further these pillars of our democracy. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Mr. Hatch. Also signed up to speak tonight is Brandon Lantham from Merrimack.
Thank you to the chair for your time. Yes, I'm Brandon Latham. As we heard, I'm from Merrimack. First, I want to say, if for some reason someone can't hear me with the mask, just say so and I'll move away from the mask section. We'll cross that bridge. I'm from Merrimack.
We can hear you.
Which means three things. Above all, that we probably recognize if anyone knows the town. It means if I put a basketball down in my driveway, it'll end up in Amherst before it stops rolling. It means that my entire family lives in Nashua. And it means that I have spent my entire life in Congressional District 1. I'm here to speak about the congressional map. I hope you'll recognize that the principles apply to any maps that we're drawing. I mentioned Nashua and Amherst. We share conservation land with Amherst. We share public water supplies with Nashua. We also share commercial districts with Hollis, none of which are also in our congressional district. I remember when I was about 13 years old, around the time I started high school in Nashua, and being taught about our maps and being taught about the voting districts, and thinking that this was bizarre, and finding it deeply confusing that my friends and family were voting for different people and represented by different people than I was. I didn't know the term communities of interest at the time, or common, and the principle of common interest at the time. I do now, we all do. It is clear looking at the proposed congressional map that communities of interest was the last priority that the majority had in mind when drawing the maps. I'm not here to advocate that it should be the #1 priority, but I think that it should be much higher than dead last. If only for the reasons I mentioned, the confusion, the lack of representation. Gerrymandered maps are anti-education because not only do they weaken the electoral power of a school district that has been divided, but they also make social studies curriculum more difficult for children who are rising to become voters. It never made sense to me then. It doesn't make sense to me now. In New Hampshire, we are proud of our politics. We're proud of this, the most representative legislative body in the world, right here in this chamber, of our classic New England-style town meetings, dozens of which, and I'm sure someone in the room has the number, voted this spring to vote for independent, fair maps without partisan considerations. I know in my town, I'm represented by 7 members of the majority, one of whom was on the town council at the time, who appear to have ignored that message from their voters. As we move forward and we try to continue to be proud of our role as politicos in New Hampshire, we need to prove that we are still that place, that exceptional place with an engaged politic, that we have earned the sacred right to our first-in-the-nation primary. Instead, if we move forward without a revised map, with the majority's map, it will be an embarrassment and a stain on that reputation. If that doesn't convince anybody, the third thing I'd like to mention is dollars and cents. Having worked in outreach, I did some quick number running on what it would take to inform the approximately 300,000 New Hampshireites whose congressional districts would be changing in a fair and equitable way, that their districts have been changing so that they can be an informed voter. Using the bar minimum, the lowest that we can do, of base mailing with EDDM targeting, no specific targeting, we're talking about a minimum of $156,000. The alternative would be not doing a voter education program, which seems like a risk of even more expensive lawsuits that I don't believe the state should be taking. In conclusion, significant revisions to the majority's map would be pro-education, pro-fiscal policy in a more abstract sense, pro-New Hampshire, and working toward our identity as proud of the state that we're from. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Ellen Farnham has signed up. You indicated this is to read a letter, Ms. Farnham?
Pardon?
You indicated this is to read a letter?
It is.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm Ellen Farnham for Tamworth, and I'm reading a letter of a friend that lives in part of Tamworth known as Cacr. a lot of folks that I know could not attend this meeting in person, but are really watching this process closely and are very concerned about some of the redistricting challenges. This letter is written, again, let me say it again. I'm reading a letter by John Gotchen. This letter is written to make a case for why the committee should not make radical changes to the current congressional districts in New Hampshire. The proposed map that has been distributed is the result of a plan that is intended to create one district that would stand a better chance of consistently electing Republican candidates, rather than the pattern over the past decade where District 1 is back and forth between Republican and Democratic parties. While understanding that the current majority party is motivated to promote its interest in surging and securing electoral wins, it is a mistake to move in this direction. The biggest mistake is that this change would pretty much ensure the failure of Republicans to mount successful campaigns in the new District 2, discourage viable candidates from running, and promote further defections from the party. And further, should a candidate be successful, their chances of doing an effective job and holding that seat would be extremely unlikely given the geographic sprawl of the proposed district. Secondly, New Hampshire has seen a huge influx of new homeowners due to the pandemic-driven flight from high population density areas over the past 2 years, the timing of which means that it was not represented in the 2020 census. The committee's proposed radical change of the congressional districts could well be a colossal misjudgment based upon insufficient data. The Republican Party in New Hampshire promotes itself as the steady hand on the wheel of the state government. I hope that the majority party on the House Special Redistricting Committee continues this tradition with the state's 2 congressional districts and leaves them largely in their current shape and not risk its long-term future by alienating many current members of the party. Thank you very much for letting me read the letter.
Thank you. Representative Ed Butler has signed up to speak.
Thank you. Past Representative Ed Butler.
Oh, the Honorable.
The Honorable. Thank you. And I am happy to be back in this hall. And again, my name is Ed Butler. I live in Hart's Location, in the smallest town in New Hampshire. And I'm the chair of the Carroll County Democrats as well. Thank you for holding this public hearing and for the complex work that you have undertaken. I attended the public hearing that you held in Carroll County. There were a variety of comments that were made, none of which I have seen incorporated into the maps that you are currently considering. The most striking of the problems, as many of us in Carroll County see it, is the very thin connection in the hills at the top of Sandwich and the bottom of Albany, where there is no road or telephone wire or likely cell phone connection between the 2 towns. But there is little, and there is a connection on the map, of course, between the 2 towns, but there is little, if any, social or community connection between the 2 towns or between Sandwich and the rest of the towns that are connected through this proposed district. Sandwich has an affinity with Tamworth through various community and commercial activities, and with Moultonborough through 10 years of its current district relationship. I hadn't seen before tonight the proposed county commissioner districts, and I would just encourage you to consider the minority map, because even though it does continue to have Sandwich connected in that very little connection with Albany, it also connects several other towns contiguous to it, so that there is a block that makes a great deal more sense than leaving Sandwich hanging down off the bottom of that top district map. I appreciate that there has been an independent effort being conducted by Open Democracy through their Mapathon group. The last proposal by that group regarding the House districts seemed to be best to me and to others who have been paying closer attention to the process than me, even though it seems to need that unfortunate connection between Albany and Sandwich. I hope that you are taking those proposed nonpartisan maps into serious consideration as you finalize your proposals. And have you heard before my testimony that the congressional map proposed by the majority of the committee does a powerful disservice to the electorate of New Hampshire? Absolutely no one that I have heard talking about this proposed map suggests other than the fact that it defines what party will win in each district. What then is the purpose of my vote, or the vote of any of those voting for their congressperson? I'm appalled. The proposed map for congressional districts by the majority members of this committee is appalling. Thank you for allowing me to testify.
Thank you. Gail Laker Phelps has signed up.
Yes, I'm Gail Laker Phelps, and I'm from the town of Chichester. And thank you for having this public hearing. New Hampshire has a long history of honoring people's right to choose their leadership, local as in our towns, cities, and counties, as well as for state and national offices. People choose to reside here not only for our scenic and lifestyle choices and opportunities, but for the long-time respect of individual choices through our election process. Our two congressional districts, as well as counties and towns, have traditionally been competitive, resulting in offices swinging back and forth between the parties as determined by the voters of New Hampshire. When towns, counties, and districts are competitive, the candidates from all parties have to work to attract the support of the voting public. They must explain their values and the goals they bring to that particular office they are running for, such as the mayorship, legislature, executive council. They have the chance to honestly debate their opponents. This is the democratic process that has held our state in good stead and has made New Hampshire a state where fairness has been the rule and not the exception. The redistricting map offered by the majority would move 75 towns and over 375 residents into a different district to openly lock in partisan control, thereby narrowing the voting public's choices. Other redistricting maps offered solve the legally required population changes with much less disruption and keep New Hampshire's competitiveness in play. One such map moves only one town to the other district. Seems like a simple solution. Please reject this partisan majority map and support New Hampshire's strong historic record of a fair electoral process based on competition and a variety of candidates and party offerings. Thank you for your work, your time, and hopefully your devotion to all of New Hampshire's voters.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Dion Lewis?
Thank you, Representative Griffin. And I wanted to just take a moment, though, on the eve of Veterans Day and just offer my thanks to anyone in the room, anyone listening that's a veteran. And so thank you. To the committee, thank you for this opportunity to speak. Thank you for listening. Thank you for your service to the state of New Hampshire. Last month I stood before you in Goffstown and spoke of my concern at hearing the governor needing to threaten to veto a map that didn't pass the smell test. And now the Republican congressional district map that's been proposed has it's been proposed with the most extreme changes the state has seen in well over a century. It's been noted that in 138 years, 22 towns have moved from one district to another. In this one Republican map, 75 towns or wards have been moved, affecting 365,000 citizens. 22 in over a century, 75 proposed in the Republican congressional district map. It's staggering how the Republican map has been gerrymandered. I've read your statements, Representative Lynn, suggesting political considerations are okay, since it's the responsibility of the legislature to draw the maps, as confirmed by the courts. I'm here to say as a friend, remember the purpose of the legislature is to serve our society, not the majority party. On this eve of Veterans Day, I'm reminded of some of the Army values: loyalty, not to a political party, but to the Constitution. Selfless service, putting nation before self. Integrity, do what's right, not just legally, but morally as well. Honor, living honorably with every choice. Remember, the highest military honor is the Medal of Honor. But let's talk about power, since that seems to be a motivating force here in this new gerrymandered map put forth by the my Republican friends for the congressional districts. For many of you, Republican, Democrat, I know I'm preaching to the choir when I say those that drew up this map have forgotten how to handle power. Those of you that continue to conduct yourselves honorably have a personal power, and I honor that. It's up to you to remind those that are trying to grab power that the reins of power are to be held in an open hand. Remember, as soon as you try to grasp it, gather more of it, you lose yourself. Power begins to control you. It's been said power tends to corrupt. I don't believe it's a given as long as you can hold the reins of power in an open hand with a personal power greater than any power society may confer upon you. But grasp it, hold on tight at all costs, and power controls you. You are honorable people. This is not an honorable map. It's not worth your soul. Be courageous, another Army value. Go home and tear up the Republican proposed map. Be bold. Swim against the current set in motion by party leaders. For those listening and not here, I have to put that in quotes. Do what's right and show us all what true leadership looks like. Thank you.
Thank you. Bruce Beer?
Good evening. My name is Bruce Burke. I'm from the town of Pittsfield, and I want to thank you for your efforts, and I'm not going to be redundant. I think many of the points I was going to make have been covered, so in respect for the work and the time, I'm just going to make one point, and that is that yesterday, the governor of this state declined to run for the Senate. That's despite the fact that people like Senator Cruz, Senator McConnell put tremendous pressure on him. I think in the end, our governor realized it wasn't about Governor Sununu. It was just about power. And I think in the end, he chose to rise above politics for this moment and look to serve his state rather than just to secure power. So many people have spoken before me. They've given you the statistics. But once again, I would ask us to serve the interests of the state and not simply the interest of politics. Thank you.
Thank you. Alice Donna Silva?
Good evening. Thank you for listening to the concerns of New Hampshire citizens today about maintaining a fair election process and for opening up last week's redistricting meetings to the public. I hope you will give all of these testimonies of concerned citizens the careful consideration they deserve. My name is Alice Donna Silva, and I live in Concord in Ward 7 in the Merrimack County. I am a relative newbie to the realm of local politics and then fine details of redistricting. When I entered the redistricting committee last week, I naively expected that I would see my representatives working together to hammer out fair districts. Instead, what I saw was a room that was divided physically by political party. Representative Griffin introduced the meeting with her intention that 2 maps would be presented at these hearings, presumably one Republican and one Democrat. Is this the best we can do? We pride ourselves on being first in the nation, a state that other states aspire to in terms of active citizen involvement in the political process. Now more than ever, with the challenges we face as a state and a nation, we need the benefit of diverse thinkers putting their heads together to come up with real solutions. Instead, this process has pandered to the most base, divisive thinking, not only succumbing to the political divide gripping our country, but exacerbating it. The process and the maps that were drawn from it, as you've heard, particularly the New Hampshire congressional district map, are a disappointment, to say the least. 1 year ago, you and I and 814,090 New Hampshire citizens stood in long lines in the cold to vote for the candidates that we thought would best move this country forward. Not all of us were happy with the results, but everyone I talked to, Republicans, Democrats, and independents, were proud to be standing together to vote for the candidate that they thought would best move this country forward in the challenges we face today. And we rightfully trusted the New Hampshire election process with all of the conscientious and hardworking volunteers. The redistricting process that has led to the New Hampshire congressional district map has been an abnegation of the commitment this committee owes to all of us who stood in those long, cold lines. Does the Republican-drawn map that I hold here represent a map that is visually contiguous? Does it look like a map that has been redrawn solely with the population changes in mind? No. It has a striking resemblance to this map that was on the 538 website back in 2018, representing the most gerrymandered way that you could create a map for sure. While I hate to specify a Republican-drawn map and a Democrat-drawn map, this process has left me no choice. So on the drawing of maps specific to my county, Merrimack County, I support the Democrat-drawn map. It keeps Concord together, whereas the Republican proposed map divides it twice for no particular reason. The Democrat proposed map contains only 5 violations of redistricting rules, as opposed to 8 for the Republican map. In the true spirit of democracy, the Democrats' proposed map for Merrimack County actually creates almost twice as many competitive seats as the Republican map, even at the cost of an extra seat for them based on 2020 election data. Thank you.
Thank you. Roger Blay?
Thank you very much. My name is Roger Blow. I live in Ward 1 in Manchester, New Hampshire. I was born in Nashua, New Hampshire, and I married a Manchester girl, so I've been living in Manchester for 51 years. I'm very proud of this committee. It's nice that we can voice what we believe. I've always been a person that my first primary thing is fairness. Fairness, if things are not fair, it irritates me immensely. And you know, when I was a little kid, I liked Superman, the Lone Ranger, and all that. And I remember Superman, he fought for truth, justice, and the American way. This Republican map is not just at all. It's not fair. It's not right. I'm a liberal Democrat. I worked hard to help Chris Pappas win. I love him. I think he's a great person. But if the Republican would win, that's no problem. But if it's fixed, if it's rigged, you know, what good is that? That's not good at all. I think we should have an independent commission. The Governor Sununu had 2 chances to set up one, and he didn't. Now, I'm a Vietnam veteran, and I was fortunate enough to get my Moderna shots at the VA. I had 2 of them, yet I still got COVID. And fortunately, it wasn't too bad, but I did lose my sense of smell for a little while. Now, I know Governor Sununu had COVID, so maybe his smell test isn't right to know that this Republican thing is terrible. It really, really is. In 2010, the Republicans were in charge, and they gerrymandered there as well. And they broke the state constitution by not keeping towns and districts together like they should have. It went to the state Supreme Court, and they let it fly. So legally, you can probably get away with this. You probably can. But it really upsets me. I fought in Vietnam so that I can come to New Hampshire, which I've always loved and always been proud of, and to see our fellow citizens cheated out of their votes. You know, this country started because of lack of representation from the British, right? We were paying money for taxes. We weren't getting a representation. If this map, Republican maps, goes through, then we're screwed. And it's just, it would embarrass me to be living in this state with that kind of representation. Thank you.
Thank you. Mary Beth Raven.
Good evening, distinguished committee members. My name is Mary Beth Raven, and I'm a 32-year resident of New Hampshire. I've lived in Londonderry and for the past 30 years in Merrimack. And I'm here today not only for myself, but also to speak for the residents of the town of Merrimack. Merrimack had a warrant article on their town ballot this spring asking for fair redistricting. The measure passed 3-1. The voters of Merrimack want fair districts, and by fair we mean competitive. As you all know, competitive districts result in elected officials being more responsive to their constituents. The congressional map that you have proposed for our 2 congressional districts, however, has major changes for each district and does not make the 2 districts competitive. The existing congressional districts had a relatively balanced number of registered Republicans and Democrats. In Congressional District 1, it was 31% each, and in Congressional District 2, it was 32% Democrat and 29% Republican. But this new proposal makes each district less balanced. Specifically, the proposal puts Congressional District 1 at 34% Republicans, but only 28% Democrats, while Congressional District 2 is 35% Democrat and 26 Republican. I don't understand why you would want to make unbalanced districts. Your proposal has CD1 having over 1,800 more people than CD2. We could make that more balanced too. And your proposal moves over 186,000 people from CD1 to CD2 and 178,000 from CD2 to CD1. What's the justification for moving 364,000 people to different districts? I've been a registered Democrat. I've been a registered Republican. I am currently unaffiliated. I and the 26,000 residents of Merrimack encourage you to go back to the drawing board and create more balanced congressional districts for the people of New Hampshire. Thank you.
Thank you. Sue Natasa from Rollinsford. Come on down, sorry.
Excuse me. I'm Sue Nastasi and live in Rollinsford. Proudly, I am one of the 3 supervisors of the checklist. Excuse me. For the town, learning the details of voting laws, election, and keeping files up to date throughout the year has been a rewarding experience. As a member of the New Hampshire League of Women Voters, I have learned more details of voting rights and fully support the League's mission, empowering voters and defending democracy. In both situations, I can say I know and recognize nonpartisanship, not being biased or partisan, especially toward any political group. Rollinsford has and is proposed to keep 4 state representatives for the population of 2,597. If only looking at Rollinsford, I can't agree, but it's important to understand the larger picture for Stratford County, and that is where 4 representatives are acceptable. Once again, looking at the larger picture, and this time for the state's congressional redrawn maps, it is packed, gerrymandered, or a prime case where legislators pick their voters, where it should be that voters choose their representatives. This committee is smarter than that proposed congressional map. There is more work for you all to do. You have all done work in traveling to each county, listening to an array of thoughts for the voters, towns, and counties. In order to represent correctly, the voters, your constituents, elect you. Again, not the other way around. All Granite Staters are entitled to fair voting districts. Thank you for your time, but more of your work is necessary.
Thank you. Kevin Coyle from Portsmouth. Oh, is this a written? Right.
Good evening, Representative Griffin and members of the committee, and a special thank you to the audience, all of whom took the time out tonight to come and speak to you, and I hope that you'll listen. I want to talk about the Rockingham County redistricting. I am a former Rockingham County Commissioner. I currently live in Portsmouth, but prior to that, for 40 years, I lived in Derry and represented 9 towns as the District 3 Rockingham County Commissioner for 8 years. I looked at the map that has been redrawn, and I was puzzled by it because it made no sense to me why they would change the districts. You're moving 175,000 people out of the district that they have currently been in and have been in for over 20 years into a new district. And I can't think of a reason why you would do that. The districts are not significantly different size-wise. By moving one town, you could have made them almost identical in size, that being the town of Newfields, into District 1. But it did not make any sense to me why the Republican maps made such a radical change and the Democrat maps made no change whatsoever. I can tell you that for the last 30 years, there has been, without question, every member of the county commission was Republicans until 2020, when one Democrat, who happens to be my wife, became a county commissioner. And because of that, we have new maps which make no sense, are going to cause serious issues for who has the next four-year term, who currently has the four-year term now. It just makes no sense, and I've spoken to both former and current county commissioners, and none of them support this map. And I would respectfully ask you to go back to the drawing board and leave the maps as they currently exist. And as a Republican, I support the Democratic maps. Thank you.
Thank you. Louise Spencer.
Hi, thank you. My name is Louise Spencer from Concord, New Hampshire, and I thank you for the opportunity to give my testimony tonight. And I would like to first and foremost thank every member of this committee. I know you have spent many hours and given much of your time and hard work to this process, and I do sincerely appreciate that. I also want to thank the minority here on the committee for the thoughtful maps that you've presented. What I particularly appreciated in the hearings when you presented the maps was that you gave your reasons for the changes that you made, and I found that to be very, very helpful, and I appreciate that. I'm not going to apologize for being redundant, for repeating things that are being said by other people or that have been said at other hearings, because we need you to listen. We need you to hear what we're saying. And it's the reason that we're saying it over and over and over again. The people of New Hampshire, the people of the Granite State want fair, nonpartisan maps. It's as simple as that. And it is a goal that can be accomplished. We know that it can be done. It just takes the political will to do it. And I'm asking this committee to dig deep, every member, and to find that political will. As a Concord resident, I currently live in a ward that is combined with an adjacent town. And with Hopkinton, I'm in Ward 5. It doesn't make sense to me that that's my current district. Although I love my reps, I don't think you can find 3 public servants that I could be more proud of to call my representatives. I note that under the majority maps, this district is maintained. In addition, Ward 7 of Concord is put with Bow. The communities of interest don't appear to have been considered. We don't share schools, we don't share fire and police. Our demographic profiles are very different. The demands on our social services are different. Indeed, our very structures of government are different. Our communities of interest lie elsewhere. And for Ward 5 and Ward 7 in Concord, those interests lie with the city of Concord. And this is true for cities throughout the state. The communities of interest lie with other wards within their cities. And cities deserve to have their interests represented at the State House without their votes being diluted. But we've heard very little about communities of interest from the majority. In fact, we've heard very little about what criteria, other than the most basic constitutional requirements, that have been used to draw their maps. Perhaps if we had heard more, perhaps if we had been told, these maps might make more sense to us. But without that knowledge, we really have no alternative but to assume that politics is the driving force behind these maps. In fact, we heard from Representative Lynn that redistricting, of course, plays a consideration in the mix. I don't think we can doubt that. We're human after all, but it does not need, nor should it be, the driving factor. These maps go against everything the public has repeatedly asked our legislature to do. I repeat, people want an end to gerrymandering. They want an end to politics being more important than our civic life and our body politic and our ability to relate and connect to one another. We want to heal this nation. We want to come together. And one of the ways that we do that is by having fair maps that require candidates to go out and earn their votes by talking to all of the voters and opening dialogue with all of the voters. That's what I sincerely want. I'm a Democrat. I don't deny it. I'm a liberal Democrat. But I want to be talking to my Republican neighbors. I want their voices represented, and these majority maps are unfair, and they leave out half of the state of New Hampshire, particularly in the congressional maps. We are all the people, Democrats, Republicans, Independents, and we deserve better representation than what these maps are giving us from the majority. Thank you.
Thank you. Emily Olson from Goffstown. Sorry, with the tables up here, it's a little hard to get around.
Dear committee and fellow constituents, I'd first like to thank the committee for allowing the public to make use of Article 32 of the New Hampshire Constitution, giving us a chance to give testimony after the proposed maps were published. I personally would like to thank you for listening to us during the previous round of testimony. It is heartening to know our requests are being heard, and I would also like to thank my fellow New Hampshire residents for braving the pandemic and coming out tonight to give testimony for and against each of the maps. My name is Emily Olson. I'm here on behalf of myself and my family. I've been a resident of Goffstown my whole life and feel very strongly about shaping the future of the Granite State in a way that will see us succeed now and long into the future. I was present at the previous public testimony at Goffstown High School a few weeks ago. You might remember a bit of a fiery testimony then. I am honored, albeit a little nervous, to be here with you tonight. My fellow New Hampshire citizens have done a marvelous job of going over the numbers, so I would like to give a more personal angle. Specifically, I would like to go over 2 points: parity and prospects. For parity, while I personally identify more with the Democratic ideals, and after being an independent voter for the majority of my adult life, I understand that what is good for me may not be good for the rest of New Hampshire. I understand that democracy thrives on a healthy and fair competition, and I understand that both sides of the aisle have tried to upset this fair competition by gerrymandering districts all over the country. When redistricting is done in a manner that breaks up 7 out of the 10 counties and unfairly distributes seats, healthy competition is lost. When healthy competition is lost and seats are considered safe for either party, public servants can safely assume that they do not need to listen to the people they serve or even respond to their constituents because they are not worried about losing their seat. Once this happens, democracy breaks down, a process that we can already see happening in our country and in our state today. I personally love being a part of a swing state, a toss-up state. Like I said, I've been a registered independent for most of my life. I love going out and talking to Democrats and Republicans, and I voted for both sides of the aisle previously. It means that the voters are being heard, and our representatives must earn our vote. Specifically looking at New Hampshire's process of drawing the redistricting maps this year, it is blatantly obvious that parity has been left out of the process from the beginning. Some people have already mentioned Stephen Stepanik's quotes from earlier this year in January, but I would like to reiterate that this process should be a nonpartisan process of drawing districts that will impact the legislative makeup of our state for years to come, a process that should be independent of politics. Representative Robert Lynn of Windham, you have revealed otherwise. Last week, in response
Thank you. Just be sure that you are speaking to the entire committee, not any one individual. Thank you.
I apologize. Thank you.
Thank you.
So for the whole committee,
Okay.
this is not a political process. It should not be a political process. We are choosing you. Please show me in the New Hampshire Constitution or even the U.S. Constitution where it says that you are allowed to choose who represents us. It should not be a political process. We as your constituents have been asking for parity in redistricting maps for decades. It is your duty to convince us that you are the best candidates for the job representing us and serving our needs when we go to the ballot. Now, talking about future prospects, myself personally, if the proposed majority congressional map will dictate the next 10 years of my life and my future family's life, I'm a little nervous. While you only have to be concerned about if your party is going to win the elections of the next decade, I have to worry about if my school district, my children's school district, is going to have enough funding for my children to be sufficiently nurtured and cared for, because we do not have enough money in the state. I have to worry about if the effects of climate change are going to negatively impact my life and my family's well-being, because we are not prepared for something we see coming straight for us. I have to worry about the church being allowed to dictate my health and personal decisions in the state where we pride ourselves on living free or dying. I have to worry about if I lose my job and need help to feed my family, will my state support me until I can get back on my feet? I have to worry about if my elected officials who are supposed to serve me and the rest of New Hampshire are going to pass legislation that we need, that will help us grow and succeed. Or if we are going down the rabbit hole of the race to the bottom, except this time the bottom of democracy and morals. I have to worry about the next decade because this year's redistricting process has been a partisan bastardization of the democratic process. To the majority committee members, we are not incompetent. We see what you are doing. You do not have to look closely to see that you are cheating your way to an elected position, to a guaranteed seat from CD1. To the committee as a whole, we have come to you with open arms, asking for you to let us help with this process that we care so deeply about. We offered nonpartisan, non-biased technology and platforms to come to a fair, nonpartisan redistricting plan that would represent New Hampshire as we are. Haven't really delivered. I'm not a fan of either map, but the majority map, breaking the Constitution. Where are we at? Why are we here? At this point, I feel incredibly disenfranchised as a voter and as an active member of the state. I only hope the majority members of this committee can realize the lack of equitable and fair representation of this redistricting process and redress your actions before these maps are made law. I urge you to reconsider seriously the maps proposed by Open Democracy, the maps that we have so clearly stated that we want. Thank you for your time and your consideration. And please take into consideration my future here.
Thank you. Also signed up to speak is Kirsten Higger from Mount Vernon.
Hello. Thank you for letting me speak tonight. My name is Kirsten Hugger.
Yeah, you need to.
Kirsten Hugger.
Thanks. We want to make sure that the video feed picks up on it.
Okay, thank you. So, last summer, as most people in this room probably know, Governor Sununu vetoed a bill to create an independent redistricting commission. He said in his veto, and I quote, "New Hampshire has a redistricting process that is fair, representative, and accountable to its voters." He also said, "Gerrymandering in the state is rare." So imagine my dismay when the very first round of maps that came out following his veto were so obviously gerrymandered. I'm going to say 3 points to gerrymandering that have already been said here tonight, but I think that they're worth reiterating. Number one, gerrymandering aggravates partisan divide. When you have a gerrymandered district, the most important election becomes the primary, with the main election being secondary. This encourages politicians to drift to extremes and worsens the partisanship in our state. Number two, competition among political candidates ensures that New Hampshire voter concerns are being heard and addressed. If there's no threat of losing a seat, there is no incentive to respond to voters. And number three, gerrymandering is anti-democratic. If results are nearly predicted, people become discouraged, they have less incentive to vote, and they have less incentive to participate because they'll feel their vote is being wasted. New Hampshire voters should choose their representatives, not the other way around. And New Hampshire voices deserve to not be silenced by gerrymandering. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Jules Good.
Thank you. Before I get to the meat of my testimony, I want to acknowledge the many Granite Staters who, due to disability, lack of transportation options, or job responsibilities, do not have the opportunity to make oral testimony due to the lack of any remote testimony option for this session. I thank you for providing the opportunity for input, but providing it in such a limited context when we saw that it is possible for remote testimony to happen is both disappointing and a giant step backwards for the accessibility of our democracy. We all know pages of written testimony in your committee inbox just don't quite pack the same punch as oral testimony. My name is Jules Good, and I'm the Ward 4 select person in Somersworth, New Hampshire. As an election official and someone passionate about equal access to voting, I'm appalled by the proposed majority congressional map. I want to start by saying that while I'm obviously a human with my own political views, I am here in my capacity as an advocate for equal voting rights for everyone, regardless of their party affiliation. When districts are manipulated to create guaranteed wins for one party, constituents in those districts lose their freedom of choice, and elected officials lose incentive to be accountable for their decisions in office. With no competition in a district, candidates of the majority party will be less likely to actively listen to their constituents' needs because they no longer feel that they have to win them over. If you were an NBA basketball star playing one-on-one against a middle school kid, would you practice and train as hard as you would if you knew you were playing another NBA athlete? No, you'd probably feel safe and slack off. This means that a rigged map hurts voters in both parties because the value of a win is diminished for the majority and the likelihood of earning a win is significantly lowered for the minority. How am I, as an election official, supposed to get your constituents excited about voting and participating in democracy if they are effectively betting on a rigged game? The proposed majority map is disrespectful to the intelligence and autonomy of voters in both parties, and we should not implement it.
Thank you. Olivia Zink.
Good evening, members of the committee and Madam Chairwoman. First, I want to thank the committee for taking the time to listen to voters at the public input sessions, but also tonight. I hope you will take the input you've heard and readjust the plans. I also thank you both for keeping the city of Franklin together instead of dividing our wards. Our ward lines will need to be adjusted, but in the charter and a charter change by voters at our next municipal elections, our current wards are 526 people different, so it will have to be adjusted. I know this committee made an assumption that ward lines would be as close to perfect as they can. Equal wards in our city would be hard because the river divides one of our ward. And to cross the river and to change that, I think Ward 1 will always keep a population, which it currently has, of 3,001 people. I think it's also important when we look at the city ward lines that are impacted by all of these, that many cities aren't lucky like the city of Franklin. The city of Claremont is joined with Croydon. The city of Rochester, Ward 5, is joined with Milton. The city of Manchester gets less representation than it deserves. It should have 34 representation, not less numbers than that. Dover is joined, Ward 4, with Durham, Lee, and Madbury. I think the Somersworth one combined with Rollinsford is unavoidable because of geography. It has to be combined with another. But Laconia, Ward 6, in one plan joined with Guilford or Gilmington, or in another plan joined with Belmont or Gilmington. Portsmouth, Ward 1 is divided with Newington and Newcastle. Keens, Ward 2 and 3 have, when one plan with Alstead, Marlow, Stoddard, and Sullivan, or in another plan combined with Marlborough. And you've heard about Concord Ward 4 with Bow and Concord Ward 5 with Hopkinton. But I do think it's really important that this committee looks at the maps and tries to keep the integrity of cities together as much as it possibly can. And I understand the complexities with some cities having to amend their charters. The city of Claremont will amend their charter in 2 years, as well as Somersworth. So that will be done, like the city of Franklin, after this committee is done their work. And so those ward lines will be adjusted as Somersworth adjusted them in 2013 in their last charter change. So I think that as you sort of keep in mind city charter processes, please keep in mind in keeping the cities intact in any way you possibly can. Thank you.
Thank you. Bill Maddox from Amherst.
Hi, my name is William Maddox. I live in Amherst, and I want to thank the House Redistricting Committee for holding this hearing and the previous hearings around the state. I want to point out it's unfortunate that those with serious health concerns can't attend these meetings remotely and be able to speak. We're in the middle of a very serious epidemic, a very serious health crisis. Pandemic is raging. More than 30 people are dying each week in this state, and it's just common sense that access be made by all means possible in this very extraordinary situation. I want to remind you that Amherst was among 74 towns representing 560,868 Granite Staters who voted in favor of a fair redistricting process in town or city elections last spring. In fact, in Amherst, the warrant article passed by almost 3-to-1 margin. I expect if it had not been the worst part of a 100-year pandemic, that count would have been far higher. People are sick and tired of unfair maps and gerrymandering, but this apparently does not matter to some members of this committee, who essentially ignored the will of 561,000 voters. A fair redistricting process is important to me so that Republicans and Democrats can have a level playing field in our elections. But instead, you have chosen to gerrymander our 2 congressional districts in the most radical change in 140 years. If I were a Republican in House District 2, it'd be clear to me that my own party disenfranchised my ability to vote on congressional representation in a meaningful way. I don't know what's going on with the New Hampshire Republican Party. It seems the thrill of the insurrection in January, where we almost lost our nation's capital, and the major science denial around stopping a deadly virus has possibly altered your thinking and rendered you incapable of putting your own narrow interests above the will of the people and what is best for healthy and vibrant democracy. Let this be an important civics lesson for students who are trying to understand how democracy works and how it is undermined. Shame on you. Gerrymandering is unpatriotic, it's un-American, and gerrymandering is cheating. Thank you.
Thank you. The Honorable Bob Perry.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. I'm happy to be here again in this chamber. I wish it were under different circumstances. I rise to speak against your proposed congressional map by which you seemingly stand firm. Comparing the map with those which became law over the last 149 years reveals more than a bizarre departure. It reveals a flagrant plan to reduce the value and political influence of voters of your own party in order to guarantee a Democrat cannot win in Congressional District 1. You have been reminded of the following quote by Republican Party Chair Stephen Stepanek, but it must be heard again for its audacity. Quote, because of this Republican majority, we control redistricting. I can stand here today and guarantee that we will send a conservative Republican to Washington, D.C. as a congressperson in 2022, end quote. I remind you and the aw shucks both parties are guilty crowd that New Hampshire Democrats have never produced gerrymandered redistricting maps because they have never been the party in power when our constitutions required redistricting. This map is a replication of the infamous dragon-shaped Executive Council District Number 2 map Republicans passed into law in 2012, which on a continuum sacrificed the value of Republican votes in order to create Republican-safe districts elsewhere in the state. Governor Sununu called this sprawling district, quote, weird, end quote, as if not gerrymandered, as if of no consequence, playing on the ignorance of voters on this topic. Despite the conservative, a misnomer, Supreme Court of the United States acquiescence in this undemocratic endeavor of partisan gerrymandering, you have the opportunity to do the right thing by voters and democracy by simply moving one town, Hampstead, from District 1 to District 2, narrowing the math, M-A-T-H, to precisely 50 people. The governor has publicly stated he would not allow passage into law any map that doesn't pass the smell test. Governor Sununu, if you're listening, reject this map. It does not pass the smell test, the straight face test, or any other objective assessment of the one person, one vote principle of fairness and equity. Thank you.
Thank you. Roger McInerney. Sorry about that with the name. McInerney, thank you.
Good evening, and thank you for allowing us to speak this evening. I'm speaking in opposition to the Republican redistricting proposal that you're currently proposing. This undemocratic proposal takes a swing district, which should be the goal of any redistricting, in order to allow people a realistic chance to elect the best candidate, and it turns it into a Republican stronghold. This is nothing short of an abuse of power and an attack on our democracy. Redistricting should not diminish the belief that an individual's vote matters, that the voting process isn't an exercise in futility. A fair redistricting, when necessary, should hold promise for candidates from any party to throw their hats into the political ring with a realistic possibility of winning the support of the majority on Election Day, something I don't see happening with the Republican plan. I'm also saddened to see our democracy slipping away, driven by politicians more interested in a political party and power rather than in the representation of the people, and rather than in fairness, the American ideals, and the integrity of our democracy. My hope is that there will emerge a final redistricting proposal that looks at fair representation, distribution of population, geography, and balance, not unlike the Democratic proposal. Furthermore, with this partisan proposal, it has become clear that the job of defining congressional districts should no longer be in the hands of a single party. Rather, it should be in the hands of an independent committee. But first, this redistricting proposal should be scrapped in favor of one that better serves all New Hampshire voters in their selection of its representatives, one where our democracy will flourish. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Matthew Girding.
Hi. Thank you for having me today, and thank you for being here. My name is Matthew Girding. I am a city councilor in Somersworth. I am here today to strongly request that the committee vote no on the federal congressional district maps being proposed by the Republican majority. Not only would the approval of these congressional district maps be the most dramatic change ever made to the New Hampshire congressional districts, but their passage would be an insult to me and the city which I represent. Under the majority's proposed maps, Somersworth, along with a number of other communities, would for the first time ever be shifted from Congressional District 1 to Congressional District 2 in what appears to be an attempt to build a congressional district that is highly Democratic leaning and another that is highly Republican leaning. This is evident by the blatantly partisan choices of the communities that were shifted between districts. There was no conceivable regard for shared location, demographics, or history. Counties were broken apart, including my own of Stratford County. Neighbors were divided, and school districts were separated in this process. I understand that lines must be drawn somewhere, as we all do, but to utilize a one town-wide sliver to connect Democratic-leaning communities along the easterly border of the state to the remainder of the Congressional District 2 seems a bit suspect to me. To be perfectly clear, it seems that the only concern when these maps were made were the political makeups of these communities I reference. In what world do residents of Somersworth, Keene, all the way in the western corner of the state, and Pittsburgh, New Hampshire, at the very top of our state, share the same demographic values and needs? Though I may not know how or why this committee felt that it could blatantly gerrymander these maps, what I do know for certain is that Somersworth and its residents do not appreciate being used as a pawn in some larger political power grab by Republicans. This shift in congressional districts would work to silence my constituents by politicians who likely don't care much about Somersworth. They care about their own scramble for power. I certainly hope that it is not the case, and certainly not the case that party leaders are so hungry for power that party ideology would trump the needs of towns, cities, school districts, and most importantly, the people of New Hampshire. This is not the New Hampshire I thought I lived in, and I hope it has not been forgotten who government serves. I would be embarrassed to see these majority maps passed, for New Hampshire to steep to the low point of gerrymandering and election rigging. I think that we are better than this, and I think that you are better than this. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Lucas Meyer.
Good evening, Chairwoman, members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to speak tonight. I know a lot of folks during the public hearing process last month spoke very clearly to the need for this, so thank you for the opportunity, and I'm grateful for each and every member's service to our state, although this process is pushing that to the brink. We did not have to be here. For the past 3 years, there have been bipartisan efforts to introduce an advisory independent redistricting commission, which would have at least allowed for a more perfect process. Nothing is ever perfect, but allowing for independents, Republicans, and Democrats to come together to draw a map, but those maps were rejected. That process was rejected. Opponents, some of which sit on this committee, said, why would we allow non-elected Granite Staters to make decisions when we are elected by the people. How do you remain accountable to the people when you as politicians go behind closed doors and decide who those voters are? My friends and family understand that I follow these processes very closely. So since Chairman Stepanik's comments back in January, they would ask me, how bad will it be, Luke? How bad will these maps be? They're worse than I could have imagined. And you don't have to take my word for it. Acclaimed New Hampshire professor Dante Scala worked with a research assistant to try and draw what he characterized as the most Republican maps possible, and he fell short of this committee's work. These maps present a very clear threat. And you can hear in the testimony from my fellow Granite Staters that they understand this threat. They feel it to their core. It makes them emotional. It makes me emotional. Because it is a threat to the bedrock of our democracy, free and fair elections. There are members of this committee who will say and support anti-voter bills under the guise of election integrity. I can think of no greater tyranny. I can think of no greater example of undermining the integrity of our elections, of our voters, than these rigged maps. Please, the message is clear. The message is redundant. Reject these maps. I'm not saying you have to adopt the Democrats' proposal, but have some common sense. Because what these maps represent is the threat that our state will lose that ability to find consensus, to find common sense, and to bring people together. So I implore, I beg, reconsider these maps, go back to the drawing board, and produce something everyone in this room can be proud of. Thank you.
Thank you. Susan Richmond.
Thank you for the opportunity to give testimony, and yes, thank you for the countless hours that you've put into this. At the listening sessions that I attended, the most frequent request I heard was that towns meeting the population requirement be guaranteed their unique representative as stipulated in the New Hampshire Constitution. With a House of Representatives that numbers 400, it seems we should be able to achieve the goal of our original founders, that at least as close as possible, each municipality should have its own representative. The Open Democracy Mapathon team's analysis by county showed how many violations each set of maps had, and a violation meant a town not getting its constitutionally guaranteed or hoped for independent representative. So I'm not going to go through the whole table here, which will be in the testimony I'm going to put on your website, but for example, Belknap, the majority map, 8 violations, so 8 towns that don't have a representative that would have been entitled to it, but on the Mapathon map, 5 towns, so that's a difference of 3. More striking, Cheshire County, majority map, 7 violations, Mapathon map, 4, difference of 3. So going down and adding those columns, there are 16 more total violations in the majority maps than the Mapathon maps, keeping with the maps that have just that 5% deviation. If you go to the 15% deviation, there's actually a difference of 22 towns. So that's about a third of the violations could have been reduced by coming up with a different map, in this case the Mapathon map. So I'm not saying precisely that's the map to use, but it shows at least that it can be done, that we do not need to disenfranchise unconstitutionally 61 towns from having their own representative. And I worry also that that then becomes perhaps a matter for litigation if the maps should be adopted.
So thank you for allowing my testimony.
Thank you. Diane McCain? McCon?
Thank you. I'm from Durham, New Hampshire, and I wanted to play a little game. Perhaps we could call it Jeopardy. What do you call it when a map that appears seems to confer advantages to those who make the map? What do you call it when the map manipulates and protects certain party lines? What do you call it when the map decreases one group's voting strength? Or, oh, I'm so sorry.
Just get a little closer, yeah.
Or reduces values of the votes in an isolated way? What do we call it when politicians pick the voters versus the voters picking the politicians? What do we call it when people are disenfranchised and their votes have less impact? What do we call it when one party takes unfair political advantage? What do we call it when the districts are rigged and maps are creating an entrenchment of a majority party? I think we know what we call it. We call it gerrymandering. Thank you.
Thank you. Also signed up to speak is Representative Mary Harkin Phillips.
Good evening. Thank you for taking my testimony. My name is Mary Hacken Phillips, and I'm a Hanover resident and representative of Grafton County District 12, serving Hanover and Lyme. I'm also an attorney practicing in Concord, and I hold a master's degree in political science. I wanted to thank you all for the public comment periods previous to tonight, as well as for this evening, and thank participants in the room and for those who submitted testimony online.
Do you want to get a little closer to the mic also? Maybe lift it up a little bit, or yeah, just so you're speaking a little closer to it. Thank you.
Participating in democracy is so important, so participation in the process up to this point is just worthy of a little more praise. Gosh, I'm speaking to you tonight in my capacity as a representative first, as your colleague, but then again as a lawyer second. Gosh, I have a duty to inform you as the representative for Hanover and Lyme that Hanover warrant article number 27 as a resolution in our town meeting for 2021 successfully passed, states that my community demands that this process result in a fair and effective representation of New Hampshire voters, and that independent redistricting commission should draw these maps in a way that does not rely on partisan data like election results, party registration, or favor political party candidates or candidates. Obviously, we've missed that independent process, so we're here today. Second, I have a duty to inform you as a lawyer, and as your colleague, oof, you are in trouble. Good thing you're sitting down. Tell the AG's office to get their staff attorneys ready, because you guys are gonna be in for a litigation fight. This, I mean, let's just face it, this proposal is extreme. If it's adopted in its current form, as proposed by the majority of this committee, you are ripe for litigation, and you're giving lots of ammunition to the opposition. First of all, the process. Your pre-hearing notice process lacked enough time for people to adequately participate. It also lacked access. There are plenty of folks who could not participate because there was no remote option, and you're denying those who cannot be there because of elder care, child care, health care, work arrangements to participate meaningfully. You dropped the ball. Now that's just the pre-hearing concerns. Now we're talking about post-hearing concerns. I have yet to see an authentic transparency of your map drawing process from the majority. I implore you to publish the GIS shape files sought by constituents to see the level of granularity needed to evaluate your maps. I'm also concerned about the issue of a report detailing what you've learned at those public hearings, whether or not you took that information into consideration and drawing your maps, and if you didn't take it into consideration, why that did not happen. The public has a right to know the decision-making process that leads us up to this proposed map, and they also deserve to know why you're ignoring the will of the people. Gosh, you're ripe for litigation because of your methodology as well. These maps reveal that the committee majority was unable to avoid the dangerous abuses that were so enticing when drawing these new lines. Simply put, these maps, and in particular the congressional maps that are proposed, are packed and cracked. Your large cities and towns are packed together. Your small communities are cracked apart. Gosh, you're robbing all of these constituents a real chance at real representation. You're ripe for litigation because it's a severe breach of following legal, statutory, statewide political precedent, and more. Daniel Webster said, "The right to choose a representative is every man's portion of sovereign power." You may have heard that in the Burling versus Speaker of the House case from our Supreme Court in 2002. Gosh, experts have already stated their astonishment with these maps. You've got experts on the record before the maps are published telling you, warning you, this is a bad idea. We're destroying any reflection of polling that's out in the public realm or any political public opinion. You have been given clear warning that people are demanding an independent, fair map and a good process, and you're dropping the ball. Part 2, Articles 9 and 11 of our New Hampshire Constitution speak to the seriousness of your job at task and the rules that guide you in this. Particularly that each 3,444 people should result in a seat for a town or a multi-municipal area across the state so that each person's vote has equal weight. You're missing it. Obviously, we're not creating competitive congressional districts with these maps, despite the 150 years of political tradition in our state, and despite the de minimis population shifts that have resulted from the census data. Gosh, you're running counter to the Supreme Court of the United States and the 1965 Reynolds versus Sims case, which stood for the guiding principle, one person, one vote. Not to mention the Equal Protection Clause. Gosh, you guys, you're gonna have all sorts of claims about minority discrimination as a result of these congressional maps. For the southern side of the state, you're going to be in trouble there. Gosh, all right, well, so we're looking at a lot of concerns, a lot of them. If you are my client, I'd tell you need to reassess your position. The consequences of gerrymandering are going to propose irreparable harm on our communities if they're enacted this way. It's going to divide our political parties by furthering favoring one party in power at the expense of the minority. Worse yet, it's going to give one party a majority in the state house or a seat in Congress despite only winning a minority of the votes. Politicians, again, are picking their voters, not the other way around. This is undemocratic and deeply unpatriotic. Ask yourself, what is the long-term political consequence for your party, for our state, for the voters, if these maps are enacted into law? They're hurting our neighbors, their voting rights by invalidating their votes. They're hurting our children in their schools, and they're disproportionately affecting people of color in this state. It's going to split school districts, traffic flows, fire departments, communities of interest, and the list goes on. It's a warning. I'm here to warn you. Democratic minority maps are reasonable. They're competitive. They honor our state's tradition, our Constitution, and our laws. as well as compliance, they also comply with the Supreme Court of our United States, as well as the Constitution of the United States. If you don't adopt the minority maps and you move to enact these majority maps, attention and litigation will fall upon the state of New Hampshire. Do not let New Hampshire become the next battleground in courts over gerrymandering. Don't let us become the next South Carolina, Texas, Ohio, Virginia. Various fair maps organizations like the Elias Law Group and the ACLU will follow. They will be ready and they will litigate. It's a scandal. It will be. Not only will you lead this state out into drawn out litigation through extraneous costs borne strictly by the taxpayer's burden, it's also going to attract adverse media coverage. Yet again, there will be another extreme political issue in the national media showing that the Granite State, because of our current leadership, is extreme. Will this extreme power grab be the straw that finally breaks the camel's back, causing our beloved electorate the time-honored tradition of voting at the first-in-the-nation primary? This will have dire consequences to our citizens if we lose it. Ask yourself if you want to be responsible for this ultimate decision. You will be held accountable, if so, by voters here in the Granite State. Most important, I have a question for your committee. At a time when public confidence in government is at an all-time low, if this committee creates a preordained outcome under New Hampshire GOP leadership to deprive the voters of any meaningful influence in the next election with these proposed majority maps, are you, the committee, prepared to own the decision to rob these Americans of their most fundamental way of participating in our democracy? This will have severe consequences for our government, our institutions, and our society. The very American experiment itself is at stake.
Representative, I'm going to need to ask you to wrap it up. Thank you.
Political theorist Alexis de Tocqueville always thought that America was making a big mistake by allowing the everyday Jefferson yeoman, the farmer, the common man, to vote. This Frenchman, political elitist, missed it, but our founding fathers understood better that everyday Americans had the ability to fill their civic duties and to vote, to determine who we are and what we will be, what common good we will achieve. Heed our founding fathers' calls, honor free and fair elections, and do not put yourself in a position for the potential litigation that will follow and against our founding fathers' wishes. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you for coming again to a session. Also signed up to speak is Nicholas Macri.
Hello. Hello, members of the committee. Thank you for hearing our testimony today. My name is Nicholas Macri, and I'm a resident of Hanover and a student and employee of Dartmouth College. As you decide the new district boundaries for our state's congressional districts, I implore you to reject the committee majority's proposed districts, which are a gerrymander that seeks to remove democracy from the selection of New Hampshire's representatives in Congress. I will admit that I showed up to this hearing 5 minutes late because there's no remote option. I do not have a car. I had to arrange transportation to Concord. So maybe I missed it, but I have not heard a single person in this hearing support your majority's maps. Not a single person. Everybody here has been saying the exact same thing. You know what I'm going to say. You know what everybody after me is going to say. This has a very strong feeling of procedural democracy. We're all standing here. We're all begging you to not do this, to allow us to have competitive elections. For the past decade, the first district has flipped back and forth between Republicans and Democrats, rightfully so, because not the same party should have power all the time. If our voters think that the other party should be in power, they should have the opportunity to do so. This map is taking that away. We're going to have a map designed to elect a Democrat in District 2, a Republican in District 1 for the next 10 years. Why should we even bother to participate? Why should we vote? Why are we all here at this hearing today begging you to not do this? It just makes us feel like this is a hopeless process, like our elections are predetermined, and that for the next decade, we won't really have a choice. We're going to show up to the polling station, we're going to vote, but this map was drawn for a purpose. It was drawn to create a predetermined outcome. I'm in the 2nd district. In the past, our district has been more competitive. This map will not continue that. It will make it more democratic. It will, you know, why even hold a general election if we know what the outcome is going to be? It doesn't need to be like this. There is the minority's proposal. They've drawn a map that has made the minimal changes possible to make sure the populations are equal and to keep towns and cities together. We can update our maps to the change of the population. That's what this redistricting hearing is for. This majority map, as everybody has said, has completely moved, you know, dozens of towns. Can you articulate a reason why? I mean, well, what is the purpose of completely redrawing the map other than the explicit political reasons that that party chairman that we've heard so much about has said? I don't know. It's quite depressing to think that our elections could be predetermined in this way. I think we all want to participate, and we all are asking you to allow us to keep the choice that we have. Currently, we have very competitive maps. We have the ability to have representatives fight to keep their jobs. They're not assuming that they're going to win. They're not ignoring constituents because they know that they don't really need to work hard to campaign. We should not adopt the majority's map. Every single person in this room is asking you not to do that. Please listen to us. Please. You have the power to prevent this. Like other people have said, you don't need to adopt the Democratic map. There's just no reason to draw such an absurd gerrymander for no reason detached from politics. We're all begging you. Please don't do this. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for making the effort to come down. Fred Mayer?
Good evening, Madam Chair and members of the committee. Thank you very much for this opportunity. I live in Hudson, New Hampshire. I work in Nashua, New Hampshire. My wife and I have lived in Hudson and worked in Nashua for more than the past 3 decades. Consequently, it seems obvious to us that there's a certain community of interest between those two communities. And therefore, I was disappointed to learn that the majority has put forth a plan that would kick my town of Hudson into some new district, along with many other communities, into some new district, to achieve some result that is difficult for me to get my head around. And it occurred to me that although my personal little grievance about where my hometown is going to wind up if the majority's maps were adopted, occurred to me that that's really not the important question for me to ask. And frankly, not the important question for the representatives to ask. It strikes me that all the representatives should be asking themselves, when they go to their communities, when you talk to your families, when you talk to your neighbors, when you talk to your constituents, do they tell you that what we really need is greater polarization? Do they tell you that the one thing we really need is more partisanship? Because if they tell you that what they want is a plan that will be designed to maximize the ideological distance between the two representatives that this state sends to Congress, well then, job well done. But that's not what I don't think that's what I'm hearing in my community. So I ask you, is that what you're hearing in your community? The other important question to ask is that if you believe that your party has the ideals, the values, the agenda shared by the majority of the citizens of this state, then surely what you want is a redistricting process that yields a relatively even distribution of Democrats and Republicans. Because when you skew the districts so that one leans Democrat and the other leans Republican, what you're doing is you're giving up on one of the districts. You're writing it off. If your values are the values of this state, it would seem to me that you'd want to go for two, that you'd want to give yourself the best shot at electing folks of like mind to both of our congressional districts. And the way to do that is to give us fair maps. Alternatively, ask yourself whether your party is so out of sync with the majority of the citizens of this state, with the majority of your neighbors, that the only way that you can possibly elect even one congressperson to the United States Congress is to have a skewed map. And if your answer to that question is yes, then the question I would leave you with is, under what ethical system can that possibly be the right thing to do? So I'll leave you with a request. Have a little faith. Please have faith in the citizens of the state of New Hampshire. Have faith in your friends, your neighbors, your constituents. Have a little faith in the democratic process and give us fair maps. Thank you very much.
Sorry, I don't have my mic on. Also signed up to speak is Roy Schweiker from Concord.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, members of the committee. I'm Roy Schweiker, and I would like to say that I don't see the big deal about why it's bad to move people from one district to another. It makes the districts better. I think you've heard a lot about how the majority plan looks like it's gerrymandered. I'd like you to look at the minority plan. It also looks like it's gerrymandered. I mean, both of them are wacky. We have Concord and Nashua in the same district, and Manchester halfway between in a different district. This is just outrageous. And if you want to talk about communities of interest, I'd say let's group the whole southern tier together. We got to come and say that it was bad to put Keene, Pittsburgh, and Somersworth in the same district. Well, I would say that those three communities have far more in common than they have with Salem and Nashua. So what I'd like to suggest is you throw out both of these plans, and you pick plans far more rational. You have one district that's essentially Hillsborough and Rockingham counties. That's a system with the SMSA spreading over from Massachusetts. It's a bunch of towns that have common interests, and it turns out that numerically that's actually a very good fit. And if you want it to be a better fit, you can shed a few towns from Rockingham County and Hillsborough County into the other district, but you can pick towns that may have more community with that district. So I think that instead of splitting, 7 counties, you could get by with splitting 0 counties if you think that number works. You could certainly get by with splitting only 1 county. At most, you'd split 2 counties. And so that's a very consistent setup, and it works numerically, and it works with a community of interest. So I think we should throw out both of these plans for the congressional districts and do something that makes common sense. And as far as the county representative districts, I think I do agree with the people. Once again, let's change things if it makes it better. There's no reason that the city of Concord should be sharing representatives with Bow and Hopkinton.
they should have their own set of representatives. So from that perspective, I would say, let's do the Concord representatives like the minority plan to keep Concord together. As far as the rest of the communities, I don't want to speak for them. I don't know if they would like the majority or minority thing better, but certainly Concord should have its own set of representatives independent of Bow and Hopkinton. Thank you.
Thank you. Signed up to speak from New London is Nancy. Nancy, you know what I'm about to do, so remind me, please, how to pronounce your last name.
Nancy Marascio from New London. A past select board member would always advise us at meetings that he wanted to hear compliments and complaints. Compliments first. So I want to start with a compliment. You have changed the process of redistricting by honoring people and coming out to the counties, you coming to them and allowing the testimony to happen that way. You've also changed it by what you're doing tonight. I remember a time when there was a hearing after the maps were drawn, but the maps were not available to the public. So we had a hearing and nothing to talk about. So that aspect of the process also is wonderful that you've done. And I hope both of those processes continue in the future because it honors the voters and it honors your listening. A complaint is that we don't know the standards you all used. We don't know if Democrats and Republicans used the same ones. We don't know if the standards across the various kinds of maps are the same. And it would be useful to know those standards. A compliment. You know the Fair Maps Coalition of 4 nonpartisan organizations has done a great deal of work. And we thank you for paying attention to that work. We had experts drawing maps. You paid attention to those. We had a new category of standard, communities of interest, which provided a huge amount of insight. In fact, they did surveys, 60 questions, I think, on the surveys of many communities to unearth various communities of interest. I want to use as an example New London, my town, and Newbury, my former town. For example, the survey unearthed that they share assessors. Well, that matters. It also shows us how to look at the maps, and I would recommend for New London that you use the majority map. The minority map puts New London with Danbury. Thinking of communities of interest, Danbury is in a different regional planning commission. It's in the Newfound School District. New London is in the Kearsarge District. Things like that matter when you have a representative trying to look at the range of the communities they work with. Newbury, who we've been with for 10 years, has the same kind of problem on the minority map. It puts us back with Henniker. You've heard my anecdote before. When we were put with Henniker the first time, one of the people running for office in Henniker happened to come to the town office and library the same time I was there, and she said, "Oh, what a lovely town. I've never been here before." That is not the kind of representation you want. I would also like to share that the select boards of New London and Newbury both met on Monday night, agreeing to send you official letters asking that you keep that district together. And you will see that Fair Maps standard of communities of interest is really important. A negative has to be, and I say this as a New Hampshire native, the congressional district that was drawn by the majority will probably go down in textbooks if you pass it as one of the worst examples of gerrymandering ever. I don't want to see that as a New Hampshire native. Please reconsider. Thank you.
Thank you. Richard Gelinas from Nashua.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, thank you for your efforts and for this opportunity. Pretty much everybody that's gone before me has said what I wanted to say. I am here to speak in opposition of uncompetitive districts, and what we see here is uncompetitive districts. I think we know that democracy is fragile, and this map would be unhelpful in strengthening it. Electing representatives from the margins will only further divide our state and our country. And some examples of people that have been elected from uncompetitive districts: Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Marjorie Taylor Greene, Rashida Tlaib, Jim Jordan, Ayanna Pressley, and Matt Getz. So that's something to think about when you sit down to hopefully reevaluate this. But again, everybody else has said what I came here to say, so I'm not going to belabor the point. Thank you.
Thank you. Marie Morgan from Goffstown.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak to you tonight. Thank you for serving as state reps. Thank you for serving on this special committee. As this gentleman said, the people who've already spoken, I agree with pretty much. They were much more eloquent than I am, and I appreciate that. I spoke to you, or some of you, at the Goffstown High School. Was that in October? And some of you were there, some of you weren't. Some of you were here, I think all of you were here yesterday as I was, and there were over 35 people, I think, who spoke. Several of you took notes. Several of you had the maps out, and when people talked about the different towns and they didn't seem to make sense or have communities of interest, I saw several of you write that down. Several of you said from, was it 10 to 12 or 12:30, didn't take a break. I noticed a few of you took more than one break. I noticed some of you didn't take any minutes or notes. I noticed some of you didn't even have papers in front of you. So it was interesting. But back to the meeting in Goffstown High School. At that time, I gave you a outline of all the towns in Hillsborough, and I had written down their population. And at the time, I had said that, gee, so many of these little towns were getting so many reps. And I suggested maybe you could look into that because I guess the ideal population is 3,444 people for one rep. And I have some copies. And I apologize, there were a few errors on the list I provided you back in Goffstown. But briefly, Windsor has a population of 262 people. With the Republican or majority map, they are assigned 3 reps. Sharon, population 359, assigned 2 reps. Temple, 1382 residents, assigned 4 reps. Mason, 1,448 people, assigned 6 reps. Bennington, 1,500 people, assigned 3. But then Greenfield, 1,716 people, assigned only 1. Deering, 1,904 people, assigned 1. Greenville, those were the lucky people. Somebody wanted to start a game here. Greenville has a population of 1,974. They're given 6 state reps. But then Antrim has a 2,651. They're assigned 3 reps. I won't stand here all night. You all got things to do. In Manchester, well, I'll just go down to Manchester. They are allowed 33.58 reps, and the Republicans have said, well, 32 should be enough for them, and give them 8 flotarials within Manchester, which I don't understand. As many of the people have said here tonight, many of the people who said yesterday, and all the people who voted for an independent redistricting commission, we want fair maps. We'd like to know how you came up with those maps. Even with this committee, when I was at the meeting last week, one of you put out that U.S. congressional map and said, I did this. I figured this out. I figured this out. For 15 minutes, this person said that they did this map. And then all of a sudden, the person changed and said the committee did the map. So it's kind of interesting why all of a sudden one person did the map, then the committee did the map. Representative McGuire, she submitted maps to the public week before the rest of you did. What's the process? You know, did one of you do a map for a county and then the others just accept it? I'm not even sure on the Dem side how it was done. But you only have, what, till next week, till the 18th. Tomorrow's a holiday. You have the weekend. So within 4 or 5 days, you're all going to say yes or no. As many of the people have said, go back, work together. I know those deviations are a pain in the neck. I've been trying to figure out how to do deviations for the last couple of days. I think I finally figured it out, but I don't even understand why. You look at the deviations and they're 1.15. Well, so what? The town should have its own rep, but it doesn't. But yet it's got a good deviation. It's crazy, and I sympathize with you to a point, but I just hope that you will take the time to give us fair maps. Thank you again for all your time to work on this committee.
Thank you. Rebecca Hutchinson?
Thank you, Madam Chairman and committee. I will be quick. My name is Rebecca Hutchinson. I'm from Deerfield, and I would like to speak to the issue of the state rep districts, and particularly in Rockingham County. And I hope I'm going to share a little detail about what it means for those of us who are in small towns to have to share our reps with other towns. Specifically, I think both maps actually put Deerfield in some kinds of combinations with 5 other towns: Deerfield, Candia, Nottingham, Northwood, and Auburn. And I just would like to tell you that in Deerfield, over 100 residents signed a letter requesting our Board of Selectmen to advocate on our behalf to get our own state rep during this process. They did that. The 5 member state reps unanimously supported the effort or the request that we have our own state rep. I'd also like to tell you that the 5 members of our board are Republicans and Independents. There isn't a Democrat among them. And I want to share with you that those 100 people in our town who requested that we advocate strongly for our own state rep, the breakdown of those 100 people was about 35% Republican, 33% Independent, and about 32% Democrat, which pretty accurately reflects the party affiliation in Deerfield. So my point that I want to make is that there were more Republicans requesting our own state rep than the other parties. So the question is, why is there such a bipartisan call for Deerfield to have its own state rep, as we did before 2002? Deerfield is in 2 districts now. I think with the new ones it would also be in 2 districts, but I want to focus on our experience with one of the districts. We are in a 3-town district that elects 3 state reps. So in 2018, none of the 3 people who won a district-wide seat actually came in first in their own town. 2 of them were from Deerfield, 1 was from Nottingham, and none of them won in their own town. To make it worse, one of those who won district-wide came in 4th in our town. They weren't even in the top 3. So what is happening is people are getting elected by the other towns. 2020, it was a little bit better, slightly. The individual who won in Deerfield also won statewide. So we can say, yeah, that's, at least we are electing someone we know and they won in the state. But again, the same individual from our town who came in 4th in 2018 in our town also came in 4th in our town, but was elected by the district. So what is happening is people are getting elected by the other towns. So it's not only that we don't get to vote for a single representative to represent Deerfield, it's actually worse than that. Because the district elects people that we know very well and reject time and time again. Literally, we have a rep who has run for selectman 5 times in our town and been rejected every time. We also have a rep who's run for school board. I've actually lost count. It's either 4 or 5 times, and is always defeated. But they go to these multi-town districts and they get elected. It's really frustrating. I believe I'm correct that both the majority and the minority maps have 5 towns in our area. And again, I repeat them. They're Deerfield, Candia, Nottingham, Northwood, and Auburn. And I believe both of your maps give us 7 reps. Each of those towns is large enough to have its own state rep. So you could give 5 reps to the 5 towns and do 2 flotillas and have the same number. But then we would actually have an opportunity to elect people who represent us. We are tired of rejecting people because we know them well and then have them elected by the other towns. Now, I suspect this happens in other districts as well. I don't know that for sure, but I suspect it does. And it doesn't have to be. So I would ask you again to look at that concept of giving everybody who's who's got the right number of population, their own district, and start from there. Thank you.
Thank you. I have Kim and Harold Frost signed up from Aetna.
Hi, I'm Kim Frost, and I live in Etna, New Hampshire. I'm a member of the League of Women Voters of New Hampshire and a member of the New Hampshire Mapathon's technical team. But the following testimony is my own. As you know, the Mapathon team has spent the last several months collecting data on communities of interest, developing criteria for evaluating maps, and drafting fair maps to share with the public and with your committee. We believe that democracy depends upon a fair and open redistricting process, and that voters should choose their own representatives rather than representatives choosing their voters. I attended the hearing last week when Republicans and Democrats on the committee shared their redistricting proposals for New Hampshire's 2 congressional seats. Representative Ross Berry explained that the rationale for the GOP map was to unite the communities in the southern tier. In particular, the towns of Hudson, Windham, Litchfield, Pelham, Salem, and Atkinson into one congressional district. He explained that the proposed map was necessary in order to do this. Well, this is, of course, a community of interest. We collected data on communities of interest from over 200 participants, and this particular COI was not mentioned by anybody. Participants in our nonpartisan process identified the following COIs listed in order of priority: shared high school SAUs, shared water and sanitation services, shared police and fire services, shared public health regions, communities that high in social vulnerability as identified by New Hampshire DHHS, and shared regional planning commissions. It turns out that Representative Berry's COI crosses boundaries for the counties in the southern tier and for the Public Health Region and Regional Planning Commission COIs. It also does not have significant shared high school SAUs, water and sanitation services, police and fire services, or communities high in social vulnerability that appear to connect all of those towns into a larger community. As a result, we had not previously taken Representative Berry's COI into account in our own analyses. Being the dedicated data geeks that we are, however, several members of our team immediately set to work to see if Representative Berry's COI could be combined with these other COIs to create a map that responded to this hitherto unknown COI and still respect the others, and all of the other important redistricting concerns, such as low deviation, compactness, competitiveness, splitting, and preservation of the core of prior districts. 5 of us spent about 15 minutes each creating alternative maps in Dave's redistricting software. Each of us generated a map that respected this new COI and had lower deviation, was more compact and competitive, split fewer counties and fewer other communities of interest, and preserved more of the core of the prior districts. I've attached these maps and their associated analyses to my testimony, and I will share that with you afterwards. If communities of interest are really important to the New Hampshire Redistricting Committee, I would respectfully suggest that they take another look at the original Mapathon proposal, which does a better job of combining those communities of interest, or at alternative number 1 in the testimony that I'm going to share with you, both of which do a much better job with COIs than the Republican proposal. I notice, however, that the GOP's proposed map is eerily similar to the gerrymandered map published by 538 in January of 2018. May I point out that the proposed map is in fact the ideal gerrymandering by either the Republicans or the Democrats. I've also attached some analyses here by 538 that show that the current New Hampshire congressional districts are highly competitive and proportionately partisan, and that gerrymandered maps will result in 2 districts where the other party has less than a 1 in 6 chance of winning an election. Of course, by this analysis, if you believe in competitive districts, the Democrats' proposal is a clear winner. As you all know, and as you've heard here before, heavily gerrymandered maps, such as the ones proposed by the Republicans on this committee, will create more extreme candidates for both parties and drive us further apart. This is a terrible plan for the people of New Hampshire.
Thank you. Harold Frost.
Madam Chairman, Madam Chairman, Committee, thank you for the opportunity to speak. I'm not sure I have any eloquence to change anybody's mind, particularly at this late hour, but I wanted to go on record with my opinion. And I'd like to put it like this. Back in my high school American history, which is getting to be some time ago, the textbook explained to us how the politicians in Massachusetts, the state to our south, created sort of a slimy beast, looked like a salamander, and they called it a gerrymander. Now, this was not written up as an example of good governance. It was the sort of thing that people in New Hampshire generally look down upon because they expect their local government to be honest and competent, rightly so. And imagine my surprise then to wake up one morning recently and see in my morning newspaper that the gerrymander beast had crawled up the Merrimack River Valley and was sitting in the middle of New Hampshire. So let me explain. It is your job as a committee to beat back the gerrymander beast.
Thank you. Christine Fajardo?
Hi there. Good evening, Madam Chairwoman and committee members. My name is Christine Fajardo. Thank you for the opportunity to take part in this important discussion, and I appreciate that following the previous round of public hearings, we're here tonight and able to respond to actual maps, which you did make public. Many people have described how unfair maps impact cities, towns, and constituents on an individual basis, and there are certainly no shortage of details to remark upon. But I'm going to zoom out a little bit and look at this from more of a macro view and try to help answer the question of what the big picture impacts might be. Keeping our districts fair doesn't just have implications at the city, town, and regional level. It also stands to have major implications for New Hampshire at the national level. Unfair districts will damage New Hampshire's reputation as a leader and responsible steward of our nation's democracy. Our reputation as a small but mighty state with the ability to drive democratic outcomes through our first-in-the-nation primary or unpredictably award our key electoral votes because of our fiercely independent voters will be called into question. Our status as leaders on the national stage for how democracy could and should function will be irreparably tarnished. To begin with, New Hampshire will become predictable. Candidates will no longer venture over the line into other parties' territories, robbing Granite Staters of our longstanding tradition of up-close and personal retail politics. We'll no longer have the benefit of meeting candidates on our doorsteps, being courted as though our single vote could make all the difference. Instead, we'll be seen as one of two monoliths, robbed of our individuality and independence. New Hampshire will no longer be leading the conversation, and instead will be pushed off to the margins. New Hampshire's credibility will be permanently damaged. Instead of making national headlines for, again, our small but mighty state and all that we deliver for this country and its democracy, we're now making national headlines for our blatant flouting of it. Some have argued that redrawing district lines is an inherently political process, and therefore that might justify diluting voices of voters. But this isn't passing the smell test beyond New Hampshire's borders, particularly in states like Nevada and South Carolina, who already have concerns about New Hampshire's outsized impacts on the national stage. This would be a boon to their arguments and advantage them in their efforts to override us. Most critically, New Hampshire could become irrelevant. We won't have a leg to stand on when we boast about our independence. Our status as a swing state will be replaced with a status that we are immovable, a heavy anchor lodged in our own granite bedrock. We know the possibility of the long-standing effects of these maps. We're aware of the disregard for historical precedents. We expected a political battle, but are we really prepared to sacrifice everything that's important to us? Thank you.
Thank you. Patrick Eggleston?
Patrick Eggleston from Amherst, New Hampshire. I just want to briefly draw your attention to an article that was published November 2018 in Scientific American.
Can you, you need to speak a little more into the mic. Thank
Better?
you.
Okay. Drawing your attention to an article published in Scientific American November 2018, title, Mathematicians Are Developing Forensics to Identify Political Maps That Disenfranchise Voters. And then the title was Geometry versus Gerrymandering. The article was trying to point out the difficulty of spotting gerrymandering that's at least fairly sophisticated. And it went on to talk about some of the ways that were then being considered to really be able to get a hold of good measures of it. Since then, there have been computer programs developed to draw these maps, and roughly speaking, they're of two types. One is trying to do gerrymandering but make it look like it's not, so it looks sort of respectable. And the others are taking the course of really trying to make it so that it is not gerrymandered. Texas, for example, has used the one that attempts to make it sort of look respectable but is a horrible example of gerrymandering. And I am thinking that we should be trying to use one that really avoids gerrymandering. And many of the speakers, I think, have spoken very well about why this is important. It's important that we have people that have to go into their district and appeal somewhat to both Democrats, Republicans, Independents. That would be a very good lowercase d democratic system. And it might cut down some of the anger that we keep seeing in some places. I mean, it's just unspeakable what some people that have been elected are saying. And it's because they feel that theirs is a safe position and they can say what they want and they can still get elected. So I think we need to think carefully about getting something that is seriously not gerrymandering for all the reasons that I've said and for reasons that were said even better by some of the former speakers. Thank you.
Thank you. I've been handed 3 blue sheets with names of people who signed up to speak, and I've called on everyone who has signed up to speak. I want to thank everybody sitting here. Oh, I'm getting handed another one. Thank you. Stephen Meir. We wouldn't have forgotten you.
Madam Chair, thank you so much. Members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to give testimony. My name is Stephen Mino. I'm a resident of Manchester Ward 3, and I am representing myself, and I am not affiliated with any other organization. I'm not someone who normally speaks out at these meetings or weighs in on political matters, but I felt compelled to come here before this committee as someone who has worked in New Hampshire government at both the regional and the county level, and because I love this state and the ideas that it purports to stand for. My background is in land use planning and economic development. I have a master's degree in regional planning with a focus on GIS systems, mapping, and cartography. And I moved into this state in 2016 to work as a planner for the regional planning commissions. I have lived and worked in both congressional districts and several state house districts, and am currently a homeowner. And I understand both from the governmental and a personal perspective the importance of fair maps that reflect the unique regions of this state and really honor the underlying political boundaries, like school districts, like regional planning commissions, like sewer and water districts, like public health regions. And in this proposed map, the seacoast is unnecessarily divided, lines go which unnecessarily separate counties, and as a Manchester resident, the State House map will reduce our representation even though our population has grown. In the 2010 map, Manchester had 33 seats, and the city population has since grown, but under the current Republican plan, it only gets 32 seats. These maps dilute the power of regions and force unnecessary changes upon local municipalities who already have a limited capacity and now will have to explain to voters they're in a completely different congressional district, that their state representatives have completely changed. I'm disappointed in the Republican proposed congressional map will impose these burdens, and not for reasons of compactness, geographic similarities, or political or historical boundaries, but for political considerations. Every voice should be heard, and every vote should carry the same weight. By drawing maps to favor one political party, politicians are rigging the process of representation and denying voters their fair share. I urge this committee and the House to reject this Republican version of the map. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, and thank you for coming. Is there anybody else who wants to speak? Representative, you're standing. Why don't you come on down?
I'll defer to this gentleman. Go ahead. Thank you, Madam Chair. For the record, Peter Schmidt, representing District 19, which is Stratford, Dover Wards 1 and 2. So I'll be brief. We've heard a lot of extraordinary wisdom tonight. I hope that the majority has listened carefully, because like the great majority, perhaps everyone, I couldn't quite understand the point of view of the gentleman who spoke a little while ago, but like the great majority tonight, I reject the majority's proposed maps. I consider the congressional map to be literally odious and villainous. We should not go there. As far as the state rep maps, many of them are defective and deficient. They are simply do not represent good mechanical treatment of the state. And I've been in the House now for 19 years. I've seen the young lady who ran out the door from Deerfield, who gave you a wonderful analysis of the very deleterious effects of the planned and existing maps of her district in Deerfield and the surrounding towns. Please, you've heard not only eloquence and also a very thorough analysis of some speakers. Please, don't just make this a party line vote. If that's what it's going to be, it demonstrates that this is not a good arrangement either at the congressional level or at the state level. Please, we can do better than this. Don't give us a partisan vote. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. Sir, you had your hand up also.
Good evening. Thank you for the opportunity. And let me say I appreciate all the time that all the committee members have put into this. I spent some time today reading the comments from the various meetings. I know so many of you have put in so much time.
Sir, thank you. Could we just have your name for the record?
Yes, my name is Corey Bellabrow. I live here in Concord. I was admitted to practice law here in 1981 and have done so for the most part of these 40 years consistently. I just have a couple of comments. Number one, this meeting started with the Pledge of Allegiance, which ends with, "and justice for all." In my opinion, it is not justice for all to shift 365,000 people's voting from one district to another, or from each district, half of those people from one to another, for a reason I'm not sure of, other than for politics. So that's my first comment. The second comment I have is that if you try to move 365,000 New Hampshire citizens for any other reason, any other project, for a waterway, for a highway, for a utility, I think you'd have a revolution on your hands. Instead, you've gotten very cordial citizens making excellent comments, somewhat repetitive, but excellent, very civilly. And I think people who are not, I've been on my feet all my life as a lawyer. These people have done an excellent job. I think that guy on the far right, your far right, is a ringer. He did a really excellent job. But I have to tell you, the citizens have appeared in front of you. They've given you their frank opinions. I read most of the written comments. I skimmed a bunch of them, and they seem to be unanimously in favor. We call that the overwhelming weight of the evidence, as Justice Lynn, as I know him, would tell you. I understand in a representative system, you are free to vote as you would, but the overwhelming weight of the evidence says you should reject the majority plan. That doesn't mean you should accept the minority plan, but it does mean you should not vote for the majority plan. Thank you all.
Thank you. Yes, sir, I see a hand. Would you like to speak? Sure, come on down.
My name is Kevin St. James, and I'm with the town of Kingston. I want to thank you, Madam Chair, and every other member, honorable member of this committee. You heard a lot of people speak today. I'm sure you listened to it all. I hope you received the message. I just want to speak specifically to Rockingham County and the redistricting map to Rockingham County. Though all the towns have grown proportionally, they have been equal across. I would ask you keep Rockingham County the way it is. Just as it has been for the last 10 years, it is equal across. I've been a commissioner for 6 years, a former commissioner for 6 years in Rockingham County. And the other issue that happens if you do redistrict the whole county is how do you divvy up the seat of 4-year terms. So if you keep it the same, it goes on the same, and it's been equal representation on both sides. As a proud Republican, I would ask you, again, keep it the same. Thank you for your time. Have a good evening.
Thank you for coming. Is there anybody else who'd like to speak tonight? Mr. Farnham, you were our first speaker. Does that mean I need to end all my meetings with the first speaker in the future if we go forward with this? I think for 30 seconds we can have Mr. Farnham come back to the mic.
Thank you for your time. I'd just like to comment on the Carroll County map for redistricting of the House seats. I look across it and I see violations on this great presentation by the Mapathon people. And it goes, Democrats have 3 violations, Republicans have 4. Mapathon, under a 15% deviation, has 1, and their regular map has 3. I would like to enter this into the record and say that maybe the deviation is the problem. Because I think all towns that deserve should have their own representation. Thank you.
Thank you. We've already got it. You don't need to. Oh, it was. Thank you. We'll have it copied and scanned to everybody then. Is there anybody else here who'd like to speak tonight? I want to thank everybody for coming and commenting on these maps. The work of the committee continues. The work on the maps will continue. This is a bill just like any other House process. It will come out of our committee, go to the Senate. The Senate has certain maps that they're working on, will come back to us, and will eventually go to vote, I expect, in January of next year. So that we're in the throes of the legislative process of getting a bill out, and I want to thank you all for coming tonight for this public information session and speaking to us on it. And travel safely home. Good night.